How's it going, everybody? Welcome to Meet the Entrepreneur number 30. This is your host, ARTEEN ZAHIRI. Today I'm speaking with the man, the myth, the legend, Stephen Plappert. Stephen is a two-time alum of the prestigious Techstars Startup Accelerator, and currently he is the co-founder and CEO of Forecastr. Forecastr is an online software that, hey, if you're a founder and you hate building financial models, stop using Excel templates, stop using Google Sheets templates, go over to forecastr.co and you're going to find the perfect platform that connects you with all the resources you need to understand your numbers, predict your runway, and get funded. Stephen has a ton of amazing lessons learned as a serial entrepreneur, an amazing story. We're going to talk about all of it. Get ready, buckle up. This is going to be a fun ride. Let's get into it. I want to start it off, Stephen. It's kind of a little bit with your background, kind of your origin story. I believe you're a Kentucky native, and you went to University of Kentucky. And when you were at the school, you got your bachelor's in mathematical economics, and you started a startup while you were a student. Can you just take it from the top? Why did you decide to go to Kentucky and specifically that major?
Yeah, for sure, man. So, yeah, just like you said, I am a Kentucky boy through and through, Kentucky native. So, lived here most of my life, and it's my home. So, definitely proud to be here from Kentucky. And so, growing up here, I did kind of want to venture out, when I went to college, and I was originally going to go to St. Louis University, but I was a math guy. I really wanted to learn math, and I was intending to be a math major at the time,
Mm.
and I never really thought I would go to Kentucky. But as I got closer to going to college, I became more aware of the financial aspect of things, and I was like, man, why would I make my parents pay so much more money? Because I am from a fairly privileged household, but they were going to pay for my college. I was like, why would I make them pay four times as much, to go out of state when I could go in state? And I looked at Kentucky, and they had this brochure to do mathematical economics, and numbers have always just made a lot of sense to me, So that's always been how my brain works, and so I really I thought that was like a perfect fit for me to study math, to study economics. I wanted to go into big finance. I wanted to be a portfolio manager at the time. So that's what led me to go to school. And then as we can see in my career, I never ended up doing any of that work. I ended up, like you said, starting a tech company right out of college, and I never looked back. I've
Yep.
been doing tech and startups ever since. But
Well,
yeah, that's kind of.
what's cool is now, fast forward to today, of course, with Forecaster, and we'll get into it. You're doing a lot of that financial stuff, that you kind of saw yourself going down that path, but just in a completely different way. I'm curious, you said you've always been like a math guy. Your brain has always worked really well with numbers, and you can pick up on it. You want it to be a kind of a mathematician, and then go into finance. Where did that interest come from? Were you, like, anyone in your family really into math or finance, or where did the excitement and interest in math and numbers come from?
Yeah, it's a good question, and so in my immediate family and stuff like that, no, like there's nobody
Mhm.
that's particularly numbers inclined. Like I would say I'm definitely a an outlier in that sense. I would say really that the interest for me, I think it came from kind of birth, if that makes sense. I think it was very natural for me. I think growing up, it's just how my brain functioned. And so I think like I just was naturally drawn to problems with objective solutions. So math problems versus maybe a problem like a English problem or something like that that's more subjective. I was naturally drawn to that objectivity. I was naturally drawn to just to numbers versus words. I always tell people that, like, I've been trying to learn a language for decades and it's so hard, but numbers just make so much sense to me. So I think a part of it is like I think as humans, at least this is true for me, we like to do more of, and we tend to be interested in the stuff that we're good at. You know what I mean? A lot of times. And so, I think for me, that's where I excelled. That's what made sense to me. That's what, that's how my brain works. And so I just naturally, really dove into that. And then, and then for me, just to mention it, business was always something I was very interested in. And I'm a third generation entrepreneur. My grandfather, was an entrepreneur running an insurance company for many years. My father is still an entrepreneur running a payments company. So, I do think that came from the blood, the entrepreneurial interest. And then the number side was just kind of yeah, natural inclination.
Got it. Yeah, that's so cool. Definitely, you got the entrepreneurial DNA in you. So you go to Kentucky from 2009 to 2013. Obviously, Kentucky has great sports, basketball, especially home of the Wildcats. And while you were at Kentucky, you started a startup called Fantasy Hub. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, this was the early days of something called daily fantasy sports when people would play, fantasy football historically on things like ESPN and spend a whole season, but this was the way to do it and make real money. And, DraftKings and FanDuel are very, very successful examples of this today. When we were graduating from college in 2013, it was a really early space. And me and a couple buddies, we had the idea to say, hey, like we kind of throw our hat in the ring and get a company going. We saw a lot of opportunity. And, back to my interest in numbers, it was actually an idea that my friend Andrew had and came to me. And, that's a numbers game, gambling, betting, winning, that kind of stuff is like, it's very numbers heavy. And I was really drawn to that, kind of filling that void. Andrew's more of a product strategy guy. So that it came about kind of organically like that. And to be honest with you, Andrew and I both said, look, like we're graduating from college. This seems like a really interesting concept and idea. We don't know the first thing about starting a company really, but like let's give it a shot, and if it fails in a few months, we'll go get big boy jobs and we'll move on with our careers. And I think also crediting our parents, Andrew's father and my father, both gave us $25,000, $50,000 in angel capital to start the business. And they said, guys, look, like we would have put this money towards an MBA, like treat this as an MBA and go get yourself an MBA, right? Like start a business. Like what a better way to learn, trial by fire. And that 50K ended up giving us enough of a boost to get the company up and like kind of off the ground. We parlayed that into future rounds of capital, and it ended up being a 3-year journey, that taught me so much about how to build a company. It took me down to Austin, Texas, and going through Techstars. So, so much to say about that experience. But yeah, that's kind of how it got started and came to be.
That's really cool. And it was it like a website or a mobile app? How did you guys go about building the platform itself? And then like once you build it, how'd you go and spread the word to get users?
Yeah, great question. So it was a web application as well as a mobile app, and you would log into fantasyhub.com in order to bet and wager real money against other real people and win in fantasy sports. So you would like set a team of a fantasy basketball team, fantasy football team, fantasy soccer team, and play against other people in the way that perhaps some of the audience you may be familiar with solutions like DraftKings and FanDuel. It was exactly like that. It was kind of a I guess you'd call it a copycat, solution to that, right? Kind of trying to ride their coattails. And I will say on the topic of growth and go to market, right, and building that early critical mass for a consumer platform, super challenging. And I would say first time founders. So we did a lot of unscalable things. Let's just say a lot of cold calling of organizations to try to partner with. We allowed people to raise money for charity through our platform, which was something unique. And so cold called a lot of charities, cold called a lot of charities that athletes have. Adrian Peterson's charity, Kurt Warner's charity, Bo Jackson's charity, and they actually ended up playing on Fantasy Hub, giving away signed memorabilia, meet and greets, free tickets to games in exchange for donation-based, fantasy games. And that actually was how we cracked the nut. That's how we broke into the space. Was what started as a potential user acquisition kind of hack ultimately ended up became a big piece of our brand. We were fantasy sports for charity. You could wager and win real money, but you could also donate that money to charity. And a lot of professional athletes promoted us on social media to their large followings. Fans would come to play against Adrian Peterson and get, free tickets on the 50-yard line, but then they would stay to play our other games because that was just the way they broke the seal. So it was a space of like a really high customer acquisition cost, and that's how we ended up kind of making a name for ourselves, and that's why we made it as far along as we did.
That's amazing. Brilliant strategy and a very mission-driven way to differentiate yourself. Because I was thinking, I'm sure competition always fierce, especially, with DraftKings, FanDuel coming up. Really cool way to be unique and differentiate yourself, working with the player charities. So that's super cool. And then, of course, you mentioned through Fantasy Hub, you guys got accepted into Techstars, one of the most competitive, highly selective startup accelerators. Only accepts 1% of applicants. So kudos to you guys. what was that experience like? Yeah, maybe talk a little bit about Techstars and going to Austin and all that stuff.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And man, it's cliche to say, but it's true. It's like that experience was totally life changing for me. Techstars is a phenomenal organization. It really is, and it's grown so much over the years. And I really think that in a lot of ways it's stayed true to its ethos. It's just like it's such a high quality network of serial entrepreneurs, of experienced folks that know what they're doing. And I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, so this is not a hub of entrepreneurship necessarily. There's great founders here. There's great companies here, but we're not the kind of density that San Francisco or Austin or New York has. So for me, going down, getting selected into Techstars, going down to Austin, being surrounded with founders who have done it time and time again and know they're experts in their field, it was huge for me as a young entrepreneur to just soak it up like a sponge, to learn, to turn unknown unknowns into known unknowns, if that makes sense, right? Become more consciously incompetent rather than the opposite, right? And learn where are your gaps and what do you need to learn, and then go commit yourself to that. It was very much like it kicked off a very much, I think, like a period of learning and growing and kind of sharpening my skills as an entrepreneur. And a lot of that came not really from Techstars programming, but from the network, just from bumping elbows with a lot of, experienced entrepreneurs that have, they're a few rungs up on the ladder from you. So it was a really awesome experience. I still have great friends from that Austin experience. I still go down to Austin once a year to see my people, because it really is such a strong tribe, and we were lucky to get selected. And of course, my latest company, Forecastr, is also a Techstars company. And so that says all you probably need to hear about how much I appreciate Techstars, because I'd already been through Techstars, and when I started the next one, I was the first thought on my mind was like, man, I think this would make a great Techstars company, and I'd love to go back through the program just because it's so valuable. So, yeah, big experience for me.
100%. And was there a reason you chose the Austin cohort? Any kind of strategic reason for that?
No, not necessarily. I mean, the answer really is that they were the ones that accepted us.
Uh-huh.
We applied to New York, Boston, and Austin. New York and Boston both declined us before the phone interview piece. They declined us based on the online application. Austin gave us a shot, and we chased it all down and we got in. So
Hmm.
that's why. Honestly, I'm not sure why Austin was the third program that we did apply for, because this was in the early days. I mean, this was 2015 down in Austin, so Austin was on the up and come,
Yep.
but it was
Yep.
not a huge
Hmm.
burgeoning, place like it is today. So it was a great time to be in Austin, honestly.
Yeah, that's a really good point for like a lot of our listeners. A lot of founders, entrepreneurs that are trying to get into Techstars apply like only for the location that they're in, their city. But it's really wise to kind of broaden that, and because all like you said, all the cohorts are great. It doesn't matter which city. So any way you can get in, just go after it and cast a wider net because all of their programs are amazing. So really cool point there. Um, so you did for Fantasy Hub, you did the accelerator in 2015. So that was about 2 years after you graduated. Really cool how your family kind of viewed it as an MBA. You honestly likely very likely learned a lot more than you would have in a traditional MBA program. So that makes a ton of sense. So what happened then? After you went through the Techstars program, when did you decide to kind of part ways from that venture, and what was really next for you after that? Where was your head at in that moment?
Yeah, great question. So, so we went into Techstars with some solid traction, still pretty early stage company. I would say kind of in between pre-seed and seed stage in today's terms. And coming out of Techstars, we raised a $1.1 million seed, and but it was the same summer that DraftKings and FanDuel each raised a $500 million Series E. So they collectively got $1 billion in capital. We got 1 million. We all put it into marketing, all three of us. Theirs went a lot farther than ours. But what really happened that year is a very interesting year, where a lot of attorney generals started to look at the space and say, "Hey, this looks a lot like gambling. We'd like to regulate this space, understandably so, at some level." But it did cause the heck of a stink. It like investors really kind of backed off from the space. not sure where it would land from on the side of regulations, and said that the landscape kind of dried up. DraftKings and FanDuel had, $500 million, so they kind of weathered that storm quite well. We, along with about 15 other sites, we were fifth in the space of 20 sites, all collapsed and died and rolled up to DraftKings and FanDuel, one way or another. Usually through smaller sites that eventually then rolled up into them. DraftKings, in fact, bought our user base. So, that's what happened to a lot of companies in that space, ours included. So this is like early 2016. We had to make the really hard decision to wind the company down. We were growing well, but not in a position to raise future capital. We tried, but we could only get 250,000. It wasn't going to be enough, and that was one of the mature moves that we made to say, look, instead of taking this 250, which the guys were willing to write the checks, we don't think it's going to be enough. We think that's going to be throwing good money after bad, and we're going to call it quits. And that's a hard decision when you're sitting on 250 that could give you another 6 months to give it a shot. But we called a vote of no confidence, and I think that took a lot of maturity for us to do that at that time. I think it was absolutely the right call in hindsight. And it's not easy to shut a company down. You asked where my head was at. I mean, I was in a pretty dark place, to be quite honest. It's my first company. I put everything I had into that company, so I felt like Fantasy Hub was me, and I was Fantasy Hub. And when Fantasy Hub failed, we had such a great base of investors that really, they were experienced. They knew the risks, and so they were good about it. Except for one investor made my life a living hell and taught me that you really need to have the right investors. This guy even went so far as to sue the company on the basis that we knew what the attorney general was going to do months in advance, like we had a bug in his office,
Ridiculous.
and didn't disclose it, which of course we disclosed it, any kind of risks, out the wazoo. So this guy was just trying to grandstand and do whatever he could to claw himself out. So, but it taught me a lot. It taught me you got to be careful about the folks that you put on your cap table. And too often founders get those big eyes, and someone's willing to write a check, but you have to make sure that you're getting the right people on the cap table. So it was a tough time for me. I would say it was kind of a dark time for me. I went through a period of depression, to be quite honest with you, and said, look, like, man, that was really hard. And but after about a month or two, once that company had wound down, and I had some time to reflect, and I had some time to really think back on that experience. It was such a launch pad for me in my career as an entrepreneur, and I knew in that moment that I would be a career entrepreneur. I knew that it was the life for me. It's like it's so gritty, it's so hard, it's so creative, it's so rewarding. I knew that this was it for me, but at the time I didn't want to start another company right away. I mean, it's such a stressful, hard experience. It's it's no joke. So I was like, man, I want to stay in startups, but I don't want to take on the stress of being a founder again right now. I need some time. So what could I do? And I went back to my numerical roots, right? I said, look, well, I loved managing the financial model and the financial part of Fantasy Hub. Maybe I could do that for other companies. I could participate in the startup world, but I wouldn't take on the stress of being a founder. And that led me over a 4-year period. From 2016 to 2020, before pausing that and starting Forecastr, I was a fractional head of finance for early stage companies. I built a lot of financial models for companies, mostly through Techstars, and parlayed that into retainer engagements, managing their finance. And so that's how I got this kind of deep domain expertise in startup finance and financial modeling. It was just, being numerically inclined, failing a company, not wanting to be a founder again right away, and so wanting to be founder adjacent, and there we go. A new career for me was born, and a new company was born.
That's awesome. So how did that come together, the fractional CFO? I mean, you mentioned Techstars. That was like a really good, pipeline of startups and potential clients for you, I'm sure, that you could tap into. So the network was huge. But how did it all come together? Did you have to like formalize another entity and provide your services a certain way? How did you go about becoming that fractional CFO for that period of time?
Yeah, great question. And the more I talk, the more this feels like a Techstars commercial. And I promise it's not. But it's like, but it's just there's just so many, kind of threads throughout my career. But when my company failed, I went to the other 9 companies in my Techstars program, whom I had helped build their financial models in program because I loved that aspect. And I was like, hey guys, Fantasy Hub's dead. Like, you guys know me, I'm a legit, like, maybe I could do some work for you. And I got 2 or 3 engagements out of that, managing the models and kind of and running their finance. And then Techstars has this program called Techstars Connect. It's now Techstars Universe. It's just like a forum where all of the Techstars community can interact. And I became active in that forum, and I became known as the guy who could build you a reasonably priced financial model and a great financial model. So you know how it is, just word got out, and I just started to get clients through that, a pretty steady stream because there's such a big network. And for a while, I just did it all 1099. You know, I was just 1099, a contractor. I just kind of managed it as a sole proprietor. I did that for a year. I actually ended up taking 6 months off and hiking the Appalachian Trail in 2017. So I cut off all those engagements after a year. I went and hiked from Georgia to Maine, in 2017, and just spent 6 months in the woods. And then when I came back in late 2017, I actually more or less got kind of like aqua hired into a company called Venture First. So there's a company here locally called Venture First in Louisville, and they do CFO services and really all finance for high growth startups. They brought me in, to basically kind of like do that with them. You know what I mean? I knew the CEO well, and so that was actually my first and only W-2 job that I haven't provided for myself in my entire career was at Venture First. And I was there for the next 2.5 years. That's where I met Logan, my co-founder. He was at Venture First as the head of FP&A. So that's how Logan and I came together, and that's really how Forecastr was born.
That's a perfect segue into Forecastr. So that's super cool. So you first and only W-2 job ever at Venture First. Your co-founder of Forecastr, Logan, was the head of FP&A over there. How did you guys describe that, like what leading up to that moment where you guys hatched the idea for Forecastr? You were coworkers at Venture First. How did the idea come about? And then, what was the catalyst that was like, all right, I'm ready to go into entrepreneurship again and take the plunge another time?
Yeah, great question. So interestingly enough, in the year I was doing all the financial modeling before I went on the Appalachian Trail, I had started to kind of sniff at this concept of like, hey, could you not do like the Carta of financial models? Could you not build an online integrated financial model, a new operating system for that that's not based in Excel? Carta did it for cap tables. Why couldn't you do it for financial models? I started to have this kind of idea because I'm building all these models. I'm seeing how replicatable they are, how much a robot could do this at some level, right? And just how much better it would be in an online integrated world. And I was calling the company Crystal Ball, but I was committed to go doing the Appalachian Trail. So I'm like, look, I'm not going to go start that. I want to go do the Appalachian Trail. And after spending 6 months in the woods, and for me, I'm a big outdoorsman, so that was very recharging for me. When I came back, I was like, I'm ready. Like, I'm like, if the right idea comes, if the right person comes, blah blah blah, I'm ready. And I ended up joining Venture First because I was like, that's a great way to just, make ends meet while I'm kind of letting things marinate. And I wasn't immediately thinking about Crystal Ball again. It was just an idea in my head. And about 3 months into working at Venture First, and me and Logan sat back to back. We were similar ages. We got along super well, yin and yang. And so we just became good friends. Logan came to me a few months in. He was like, hey, man, for the last year, I've been building all these models, and why couldn't we do it like Carta? And he's having the same idea. And I was like, man, you know what? I was like, I was thinking the same thing, before I went out on the AT. And so it was that kind of sparked everything where had Logan not refreshed that idea in my mind, I don't know if I would have taken immediate action on it. But when he did, it was kind of like, I had that thought and thought it was a pretty good idea. Now you're having that thought and sitting in a similar seat. If we're both having that thought, we almost owe it to ourselves to do some diligence on this. And this was one of the things that you learn as a founder, right? It's like my first time Fantasy Hub, I had the idea and I just started the company. We got 50 grand from our parents and we just started throwing spaghetti on a wall. And it worked out, but we skinned our knees along the way. This time we said, hey, we've got this idea. We've got jobs. We've got full-time employment. Like, let's not add any burn to the company. Let's moonlight. Let's de-risk. Let's clear certain hurdles. So for the next 18 months while working at Venture First, Logan and I did a lot of customer discovery. We contracted through equity with a firm here locally to build us like a alpha prototype. We started courting investors. We started doing things that would de-risk the company before we, added our own personal burn to it, right? And I think that was, for me, I think that's something that, is really smart to do, is kind of like, get the company through some checkpoints before you go all in. It'll reduce the risk for yourself as a founder. It reduces the risk for investors a lot of times. and it's just a less stressful way to get the company off the ground. So we could talk more about that if you'd like, but that's kind of like there was kind of this incubation period of Venture First, and Venture First was actually very kind to us in that they actually supported that, and they're a shareholder in the company, which is cool as well. So
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, it's such it's just so funny how life works, how like that situation that you were in was like perfect. Like with Logan having the exact same thoughts that you did, and then the environment with Venture First that was allowed you guys to take that very pragmatic step-by-step approach. Like you said, obviously reduces a lot of risk when you go about building a business that way. And more importantly, reduces a lot of stress and anxiety as well, because you're clearing a lot of these hurdles before you're taking on um, so much uncertainty when you just kind of do it like the first way, just put in money and see what happens. So totally get that. Makes a ton of sense. And yeah, it would be awesome to hear. It sounds like you guys really were super resourceful. Like even building the platform itself, you worked with a local firm, kind of partnered up with them. What are some of those things you did to get it off the ground? And then once it was off the ground, um, you can talk about kind of the steps you took from there to start scaling it and make it a more full-time thing instead of a moonlighting thing.
yeah, totally. So the three main things I felt like we needed to do to get it off the ground, and largely kind of came from my prior experience as a founder, and specifically a non-technical founder, was like customer discovery, tech, and investors. Like I felt like if we could really get a deep understanding of the customer and leverage a deep customer discovery process to basically get a bunch of founders on a wait list, more or less, right? Because you do a bunch of customer discovery, and all of a sudden you're naturally going to get folks that are interested. So it's a great way to like seed your sales funnel, right? So we did tons of customer discovery, about a couple hundred founders we talked to and seeded the sales funnel. Logan and I were non-tech, so we went to this firm, that we knew and trusted here locally, Apex Development. We did an equity deal with them. We're actually Venture First put up a little bit of cash. We put up a little bit of equity through a convertible note, and worked with them to build an alpha prototype. But we knew that wasn't going to be sustainable. Like that was just to get us started. Logan and I were on the hunt to find excellent technical talent, and we did in the form of Jonathan Frazier and Stephen Ames. Stephen and I had worked together at Fantasy Hub. Jonathan is one of the smartest people I've ever met, and he and I connected to a startup weekend event here locally, and an event called Founder Beers that I run, and we just really hit it off. And so, but we were intentionally out there looking for someone who could really own the technical side of the business because we knew that was a big skill gap that we had, right? So fill that skill gap, seed that funnel, and then talking about seeding the funnel, talk to investors. That's one of the things I've learned the hard way over my career is that there's no silver bullet when it comes to investment and fundraising. You've just got to build a network. You got to play the numbers game. It's a relationships game. So we spent over the course of 2 years a lot of time just courting investors, just breaking seals, right? Having initial meetings, getting them on a monthly company update list, keeping them informed, creating kind of a trajectory that they could see towards us starting this thing full time. And so once we had done a bunch of customer discovery and validated the concept, once we had found the technical talent and built this prototype and started to, build this network of investors, Logan and I felt like, check, check, check. Like we were ready to go ahead and start the company. We kicked off a pre-seed round of $750,000 in Q4 2019. We were able to successfully, raise that round, including 100K from Techstars because we got into Techstars that very same quarter, and then January 1 of 2020, cut off everything else. We went full time on Forecastr, me, Logan, Jonathan, and Stephen Ames, and we went straight into Techstars that same month we started the company. And then, rest is history, as they say. We've been almost around for 4 years now. And talk more about that journey too. But that's how we kind of that's how we approach that early incubation period, the kind of checkpoints, the hurdles we wanted to cross to ultimately kind of take the leap of faith, and go full time.
Awesome. Thank you so much for walking through that process. Super applicable and actionable for so many founders and people thinking of starting a company. That's straight up gold right there. Why don't we just get the obvious question out the way? Why do startups need financial modeling? Why is it important for an early stage startup?
Yeah, great question, man. Honestly, it's a great question because I tell everybody when I talk to founders about this, I'm like, look, like I don't need to tell any founder, right, that there's just not enough hours in the day. There's so much you got to do. There's so many competing priorities. There's not enough hours in the day. You got to be really selective about what you in fact do. So why spend any time on financial modeling, right? Like why take some of your valuable time and do that? In my opinion, it is a wonderful framework to help you meet your three greatest objectives as a founder, which for me are hitting growth targets, not running out of money, and raising capital. Like as a venture-backed startup, as a high-growth startup, I've got to hit my growth. I cannot run out of cash, and I've got to raise money. I think a financial model is a dead hit on all three of those. Hitting growth targets and not running out of cash, that is a future finance game. Like you are setting goals for your financials into the future. Model has got to be the way you do that in the smartest way possible. And that should tell you about when you run out of money. What do you need to do to avoid running out of money? Do you got to cut costs? Do you got to drive revenue? Do you got to raise money? What decisions that you have to make as a founder to not run out of money? Those two things, I don't know of another way to really manage those two priorities outside of using a financial model. And then raising capital, I think, finance is the language, right? There's a language to finance, and investors are a large part finance people. So they tend to be convinced by numerical narratives. And I tell founders that your financial model should tell the same story that your pitch deck does. You're telling a numerical narrative. You're telling the story of how you get to the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow and how big that pot of gold is. So I have found it's very useful in a fundraising environment to convince investors to write a check. So that's what we think. I think like if you build a great financial model for your company, it should help you raise capital. It should help you set and achieve your growth targets, and then ultimately make sure that you don't run out of cash because you are aware of your cash flow positions.
Yep. All amazing points. And when do you start, like how early do you actually start to pay attention to this and start focusing on the financial aspect? Like with Fantasy Hub and Forecastr, was it on day one you started to build out these models and think about it and how we're spending our money? Or when do you actually, like when should a founder start to take this thing seriously?
Yeah, it's another really good question. And so the answer is it's definitely a day one thing. You should be thinking about it day one and start with it, but it should be very simple at the beginning. Like there's a lot of unknowns at the beginning, and modeling becomes more and more valuable over time as those unknowns become knowns. And so because your forecast becomes more accurate. So early on, it's very important that founders put a little bit of effort into it and build a simple, what we call an MVP financial model, because you want to have that directional level insight into the validity of the business model, into the growth targets, into the how much cash you need to raise in a pre-seed to achieve milestones that will unlock seed capital, telling that story, all those types of things. But you don't want a bunch of false precision. So don't over engineer it. Keep it simple. Think about it like you think about your product. When you think about taking a product to market, you have to build an MVP at the beginning. What is that MVP? It's a summary of your assumptions about what the market wants. You build it, you push it into the market tells you what it wants, and you adjust that MVP through to product market fit, right? Like modeling is the same thing. Build an MVP financial model that describes the core concept of your business, push the business into the market tells you how the business will perform, adjust and pivot the model and expand the model, right? Until you achieve kind of model market fit, right? Until your model is representative of the business in a more stable way. And that way your forecast will become more accurate. So that's how we coach founders on it. It was just like start small, start simple. And then as you build the business, build the model and build the muscle. That's because that's the other thing. A lot of founders lack that kind of financial hygiene muscle, right? And so we need to build that as well early on, so that we are appropriately formed, for the later stages of the company's journey.
Yeah, this is a really good way of framing it. Really like how you laid that all out because, like you said, there's only so much hours in a day, and for founders that are wearing so many hats, they're focused on the tech, the product, the sales, operations. This just seems like a nuisance sometimes to a lot of founders. Like, oh, I don't want to work. I don't want to worry about that. Like that's not value add. That's not mission critical. But the way you frame it of how this numerical story is part of your overall story as a company. And if you have this thing down pat and have a strong, logical, coherent story, it's going to help you out in so many different ways with the business and being able to fundraise and grow and manage your spending and all of that.
100%. 100%.
Awesome. Well, let's fast forward a bit to today. so interesting hearing, kind of the build up, all the lessons learned. So, January 2020, you raised that pre-seed, and that's really when you guys started going, all in on Forecastr. It's been almost 4 years now. And in August, just a couple months ago, you raised your seed round, $4.5 million seed round. Huge congratulations on that. Testament to what you've been able to accomplish, especially right now. This is just a statistical fact. Seed funding and venture funding overall is down, and especially in the early stages, it's more difficult now. So that's just a testament to how successful you guys have been and the traction that you're having relative to the market. Talk a little bit about that round, raising it. I'm sure, like I said, with everything going on, it may have been a bit challenging. So maybe you can talk about the things you learned in that process, and then just how you guys have been successful, your traction, and what your future plans are now that you have that fresh capital in the bank account.
Yeah, yeah, I would love to talk about that because it's been a heck of a journey. So like you said, yeah, we raised 4.5 million a little bit earlier this year, and it took me about 7 months to get that round done. So that's the first thing I'd like to say for all the founders listening is rounds are taking a long time. I mean, right now, those early stage rounds, like Art said, it's a difficult market. It's kind of a squishy market. We started the year at 1.2 million in annual recurring revenue. We're up around 2.2 million now. We're on track to more than double this year. So we've got, I mean, pretty solid growth metrics, solid retention metrics, solid unit economics. I fancy myself someone who's pretty good at fundraising. I've got a large network. I'm kind of a finance salesperson. I can talk the talk. But it took me a full 7 months. I pitched 200 investors to get three yeses. It was a 1.5% conversion rate, even with good metrics, right? Like it was a hard fought round, is kind of the message I'm trying to convey here. It was not easy to get done. And I am very glad that we were able to get it done. I think to your point, it is a testament to the strengths and the merits of the company, as well as, the investors on the cap table. We had a lot of current investors come to bet on that. About 2.5 million of the new, or sorry, excuse me, 2 million of the new capital was from current investors. The other two and a half was from new. So, you know, that tells us a lot as well. One of the things I tell founders is, informed investors are happy investors, and happy investors write checks, which is just to say, take care of your investors, take care of who's already on the cap table. If you keep them informed, if you give them their due, they'll come to bat for you in your hour of need, which is what happened with us. So that's one big kind of takeaway for me. The other is you got to play that numbers game. I mean, think about a guy like me who I think can pitch a company pretty well. 200 targets, three yeses, a 1.5% conversion rate. That's the worst conversion rate I've ever had in my career, which I think is a sign of the times. And if I didn't have those 200 leads, I might not have got the deal done. A lot of founders start rounds with not enough top of funnel. You got to be thinking about getting the at bats and having that, running it like a sales funnel, and thinking about conversion and kind of backing into the amount of investors that you got to talk to. So, that was it. That was big for me. And then, the third thing I'd just like to say on the topic is, I'm very blessed to have a co-founder like Logan, who's extremely capable and can run the whole business in my absence. And largely he did for the first 2 quarters of this year. I think that we both agree that fundraising is a full-time job, and you've got to commit yourself to it completely if you want to get it done. So for the first 2 quarters of this year, I was barely a member of the internal team. You know what I mean? Like I checked in on Slack from time to time. I engaged here and there where needed, but I let Logan run the business. I left it in his capable hands, and I focused almost all of my time on raising that round. And it took every ounce of that effort to get it done. So, I think that's the moral of the story is if you're looking to raise money as a founder right now, you've got to have the at bats and get that top of funnel. You've got to fully commit yourself, to the process, and if you have current investors, lean on them to participate as well. That's a great signal to new investors. It's what every new investor wants to see, those current investors are investing in the company. So yeah, a lot of learnings there, but really glad that we were able to get that done, and it does propel us forward. I mean, we're going to have our opportunity to really take a crack at this thing now. North of 2 million in revenue, looking to get to 6 by the end of next year, and we've got the capital to do that. So yeah.
Yeah, and another all great lessons, and another one just to further emphasize is the importance of having a strong co-founder, because like you said, like 6 months you weren't even involved in the internal business because of how much of a full-time commitment fundraising is. So that's why it's so important to have a strong co-founder, so you guys can split up the duties, divide and conquer. Hey, I'll handle that fundraising stuff. You make sure that the ship is running smoothly. Really good points. Let's, with this last couple minutes, let's talk about the future here. You mentioned some of the growth metrics and what you guys are projected to do. How are you planning on attacking that and growing beyond that? Is it foresee some product expansion, sales expansion, trying to get into new markets, new geographies, increase headcount? Where's your head at in terms of growth and strategy?
Yeah, great question, and actually a good timing too, because not too long ago we once kind of as we were closing that round, we wanted to memorialize some of this stuff into a strategic company roadmap, which we put together, and it all starts with the vision. The vision of our company is to be the default operating system for FP&A in the private market. So like that FP&A business function, which is that financial modeling, financial planning, financial analysis business function, we want to be the operating system for that. We want to supercharge all that. We want to replace Excel as that operating system, in a SaaS plus human way, and that's how we do it. So, to your question about product, there's a lot of product expansion that we need to do around data integrations, around analytics, around reporting, around collaboration. So those are our four main pillars that we're focused on the product perspective, to like take this great financial modeling software and round it out into an FP&A operating system. Our number one objective is to live by our cultural values. That's something that I'd like to say, is that we're a culture first organization. We believe that that kind of culture is a huge kind of strategic element to the company. And so that's first and foremost for us, is like, if we don't live by our values, if we don't uphold those values, we're nothing. So that's number one. Number two is reach 6 million in annual recurring revenue by the end of 2024. And that comes from the forecast, as you might imagine, right? It's like we get in the forecast, we forecast, hey, customer acquisition by channel. What does price look like? What's retention look like? Where are we going to get? So a lot of that is doubling down on channel partnerships that have worked extremely well for us from a customer acquisition standpoint. So a lot of doubling down on what we've done, before there. And that's the benefit of getting a company from 0 to 1, is you start to learn what works and you can just double down on it. Number three is to become profitable. We want to become a profitable company long term. We'd like to have optionality as far as raising future capital. So if we can double, triple revenue and get to profitability, puts us in a great spot for raising that next round from a position of strength. And then fourth is, unlocking exponential growth opportunities. So we have kind of an 80-20 rule of, hey, we've learned a lot, so let's focus 80% of our time on doubling and tripling down on what works, because we know that's going to be a low risk path to scale. But also we want to be poking and prodding and saying, what's going to unlock exponential growth? What's going to unlock product led growth for us? How can we make it really easy for investors to view financial models and get a flywheel going there? How could we take our data, anonymize it, and surface it to customers as anonymous peer-to-peer benchmarks on how they're doing on churn, on how they're doing on growth, on how they're doing on headcount, stuff like that. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff there we can do to just try to phase shift the company up, but we don't want to get too distracted by it. So that's why we kind of have to put most of our focus towards what we know works, and then a little bit of focus towards that stuff that could unlock a lot of growth for the company long term.
Yeah, that would be huge. Definitely a lot of really exciting strategies, growth prospects, very sound strategy. I'm really excited to see how it's all going to turn out. Steven, before we wrap up, anything you want to leave our audience with or shout out?
Yeah, well, I'll just say, for all the founders listening, thank you so much for giving us this time. I hope it was useful, and just keep fighting the good fight. As someone who's been an entrepreneur for 10 years, it's hard. It can be lonely, and it's a slog. So just keep fighting, keep building what you're building. And, if you ever find yourself in need of anything related to finance, it really in any way, Steven at Forecastr.co, you can always reach out to me. It takes a village. So, and also just Arjun, I really appreciate this opportunity to be on this podcast with you. This was a ton of fun. So thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Meet the Entrepreneur. Be sure to follow Startup Society to stay on top of the most exciting startups in the country striving to keep the American dream alive. Until next time, take care.